Hey guys, Roy Edwards here again with Capital Presence. Today we are going to talk about creating a list in SharePoint. So let's go ahead and get started. So we are, just a reminder, we are working with SharePoint Online here. There isn't much difference between SharePoint Online and 2016 and really 2013 when it comes to creating a list. I'll show you the two ways that you can do it within the O365 environment, one of which you will be able to do in the 2013 and even the 2010 environment if you're still on that. So first, accessing SharePoint. Remember, when you go to your office.com, you will see the application icon for SharePoint on your splash screen, or you can use the waffle in the top left that will have a drop down for selecting SharePoint. Once you're in SharePoint, you'll pull up the team site that it is that you want to create this list inside. Then you will see on your homepage of your team site a banner. So there on that banner, which we have highlighted, you should see a plus sign in the word new. If you do not see the add, uh, the plus sign rather, with new and a drop down, then you uh, might not have administrative privileges to do this, or you might not be able to edit, or you might not be able to create lists in libraries. So contact rather your administrator so that you can have the proper permissions. You won't be able to create a list, and this video wouldn't really be much of help for you. So now, assuming you have the proper permissions and you're able to take the next steps, you click that plus sign with new, and you'll see a drop down. Uh, this will bring up a list of some popular apps and then a link to get to all apps. So apps are templates within the Microsoft SharePoint universe that you can create lists, libraries, calendars, Gantt charts, all kinds of different things. You can even create your own custom apps if you'd like. And then you can create templates as well that will take data from pre-created lists to replicate that across site collections, which we'll go over that later in another video. But today we're going to be creating a list. So what you would do is you would click on the word lists right there in that drop down, list rather. So you create a new list. Alternatively, you could click app and then create a list, which I'll walk you through here in a second. But for this video sake, on this drop down portion, we're going to click list. Then a sidebar is going to pop open. You're going to give your list a name. So it's important to keep in mind, we've talked about this in previous videos, but it's important to keep in mind that anything you name your list will become part of the URL. It will also be shown throughout the list views whenever somebody is accessing this list. And it's always important to keep in mind best practices of the shorter the better. The longer your name, the longer the URL, and also keep in mind those spaces that we talked about, where if you name something my space list, it will be displayed as my percentage 20 list, as SharePoint reads a space bar as percentage 20. So to get rid of that percentage 20, you can name it my list and then go in and change the URL, or you can just put it all together in one word. So now it exists. It's as simple as that. Lists are like what I like to call living Excel sheets. So for those of you who are not as technical savvy, that they are just Excel sheets that live within SharePoint that you can edit your line items and create columns or fields. And really use it to build some pretty cool applications within SharePoint. For those of you who are a little more technically savvy, they are relational databases. So you can use this data to create line items and then ultimately query them. You could run REST API calls. There's a lot of different things that you can do with them. Getting into the privacy settings and permissions, you can set permissions on a list that is different than the team site that we created last video. So you can create unique permissions to say, okay, everyone can have uh, read access to the entire site, but only a specific amount of people can actually see this list, or only a short list of people can actually edit this list. You can control the list permissions, and if you when we start getting into libraries, you can create permissions to folders and documents inside of libraries. But for a list's sake, we won't go over that. So the gear, this is the second way of doing creating a list, and it's the more one that applies to older versions of Microsoft SharePoint. So for those of you who are used to Microsoft SharePoint, this is the more universal way. Instead of doing it from the home page, you use the gear in the top right. So the gear is your friend. That's always a starting point. It's the settings area. If you are a power user or developer or administrator, this is going to be where you start a lot of the time. You would click Add an App after clicking the gear, and then from there it'll bring up your app templates. So your app templates page would look something like this. It would have a whole bunch of ones that you could create from. There's document libraries, there's task lists, there's calendars. But I like to start, whenever I'm creating a list, I like to start with custom list. It's essentially creating a blank list, and then you can do whatever you want with it. You can customize it. Um, then from there, you can create your own templates, which would then show up in this area so that you could create a list from, like we talked about a little bit earlier, you could create something that's already been created and publish it across site collections. From there, you would then choose the app that you want and then name your application. So now you'd be able to work wherever. So now you can store data to be accessed from wherever you want. Again, SharePoint is the backbone of the O365 universe, so it works through uh, all of the Microsoft O365 platforms. So it integrates with Teams. You can integrate it with Outlook if you'd like, with task lists. You can even create emails that will populate SharePoint lists. There's a lot of really cool things you can do with lists. You can track line items and access data securely through the internet wherever you are. So these line items, you'll be able to collaborate with other individuals, and they'll be able to read and access them, make changes to them, or get the data from the relational database or the SharePoint list from wherever there's internet access. So before we get to the next slide, there is I walk through of that in the environment. Um, And as always, if you guys have any questions, um, feel free to reach out to us. But you now have a list. Now you can add columns, fields, drop downs, yes, no check boxes. You could add people pickers. There's so much that you can do. Really get in, get your hands dirty, start to explore. We will go over the different types of content within a SharePoint list. That'll be for a different video. You can also amend permissions at this time, set permissions to groups or people. You could even set permissions on views, which we'll go over views in a later video as well. And unlike sites, you can delete and rename them pretty much as going forward, and you can create different types of lists after it's been created. So just because we created a custom list doesn't mean we can't turn it into a calendar. Whereas with sites, if you create a team site, you can't turn it into a communication site. That's not necessarily the case with SharePoint lists. With a SharePoint list, once it's created, you can turn it into a Gantt chart, you can turn it into a calendar. There's a couple different things you can turn it into, although you cannot turn a list into a library after it has been created. You can attach documents to line items, but you can't turn it into a library. Something to keep in mind. So again, if you guys have questions, reach out to us. We are happy to help you guys. Go to support@capitalpresence.com to send us an email, Or you can follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capital Presence, or you can go to capitalpresence.com, click on my friendly face. It'll bring up all of my contact information. So guys, again, thanks for hanging out. Until next time, see you later.